Hi, so we are going to look at the endocrine system in 3 short talks. The first will give an overview of the endocrine system. The second will explore the effects of aging on the endocrine system. And the third will describe the neuro-immuno-humoral response to trauma. So as usual, we start with a case. A 72-year-old diabetic brought to the emergency department after being involved in a road traffic accident 2 hours ago. He suffered severe chest and pelvic injuries and is in hemorrhagic shock. Over the course of the 3 lectures, we're going to consider what endocrine responses might be expected in this patient and how these are coordinated. What are their effects? These are the objectives of this session. At the end of the session, you will be expected to be able to cover these topics. So you might want to pause the video and have a careful read of what we're looking at. This lecture will concentrate on the first 5 of these, and the second and third lecture will look at aging and the neuro-humoral response to injury, respectively. So you might want to pause the video here and see if you can come up with your own definition of the endocrine system. Here's mine. So it's a system for regulation of homeostasis, which involves the production of messenger molecules produced by specific endocrine organs that may exert their effects on a wide range of target organs or systems that may be distant from the endocrine organ producing the hormone. And the messenger molecules, the hormones, tend to travel in the blood. The endocrine system really is a big picture thing. It impacts general body processes such as energy production, metabolism of carbohydrates, proteins and fats, fluid and electrolyte and acid-base balance, sexual function, growth and development, temperature control, or circulatory regulation. So these are big effects that involve the entire body rather than smaller effects that involve just 1 or 2 parts of the body. This is one coordination and communication system in the body, but there are 2 others. The immune system, which is really concerned with differentiating self from non-self, and therefore plays a big part in protection of the organism against foreign threats. And then finally, the neural system, which is a much more targeted system, either for collecting information from the sensory organs or producing an effect such as muscular contraction or autonomic function of things like the gut, blood vessels and so on. But that's much more specific, whereas the hormonal system is much more generalized. Let's think about how the endocrine system works. Well, we start with inputs. And these inputs could be from, for example, the autonomic nervous system, from biochemical changes within the body, from external sources such as injury or illness, or via the pineal gland through the hypothalamus from the higher brain centers. All these inputs or stimuli will then work on the effector organs, which are the endocrine glands, to produce hormones. Now, just to very briefly mention the hypothalamic pituitary axis, which is a system setup for the control of certain hormones, which we'll talk about later on in the talk. Finally, the hormones produced by these endocrine glands will have an effect on their target tissues or organs. These might be whole systems effects, such as the effect of the renin-angiotensin aldosterone system on circulation and blood pressure. It could be effects on very specific organs, such as the motility and secretory effects of gastrointestinal hormones on the gut, or it might be at the cellular level, for example, the effect of insulin or glucagon on glycolysis or the movement of glucose and other molecules into and out of the cells. One key component of the endocrine system is its feedback. So the end effect of the hormonal activity feeds back into the system, usually to provide a negative feedback and to slow down or stop the secretion of more hormones. In that way, we produce a homeostatic balance without having too much of the effect of the hormone or too little. Hormones molecules fall into three groups. There are steroid hormones, amino acid derivatives, and proteins and polypeptides. The steroid hormones are those produced in the adrenal gland and the gonads predominantly. They are produced from cholesterol through a process of hydroxylation or other chemical modification. They tend to be fat soluble and can cross the cell membrane. By entering the cell membrane, they can then bind to specific receptors within the intracellular organelles or within the nucleus to modify cellular activity or modify DNA production of proteins and have the effect that way. Similarly, with the amino acid derivatives such as thyroid hormone, they are small molecules that can also enter the cell and have their effect by stimulating specific receptors within the cytoplasm or within the nucleus of the cell. The protein and polypeptide hormones, such as the pituitary hormones, work slightly differently, and they attach to receptors on the cell membrane and can modify cellular activity through attaching to the cell membrane receptors. There are certain clinically important endocrine pathways that we do need to think about. These include the hypothalamic pituitary axes, and there are three that we really concern ourselves with: the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the hypothalamic pituitary thyroid axis, and the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis. We would have had lectures on each of these during the module. The renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system is primarily concerned with blood pressure control and fluid and electrolyte balance, particularly with regard to sodium and potassium. Whereas the pancreatic hormones are concerned with carbohydrate metabolism. These include insulin and glucagon, but remember they also have an impact on the regulation of all anabolic and catabolic processes in the body, including the metabolism of fats and the proteins. And finally, calcium metabolism is controlled by parathyroid hormone, calcitonin, and vitamin D. Let's have another look at this guy. So it's an elderly gentleman with diabetes who's been involved in an accident. The endocrine response for this patient is stimulated by general injury and inflammation, which then tends to stimulate specific hormonal systems such as the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis and the hypothalamic pituitary thyroid axis. There's also a need to maintain blood pressure because the patient is in shock, and that would cause stimulation of the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. These responses are coordinated through the networks that we described in the previous slide, but as we will see later on, there are also some overlaps between this, the autonomic response, and the response of the immune system. And importantly, in this patient, the response may be somewhat modified because of his age. So if you have any questions, you can bring them up in class. In this lecture, we focused on an overview of the endocrine system. In the following lecture, we'll look at aging, and then in the final lecture, the neuro-immuno-humoral response to trauma. Thanks for listening.